Yes, good morning, judges. Good morning, guests from the media and other honored guests and brothers and sisters who have attended. And it was certainly wonderful today to have such a wonderful worker turnout. I don't want to take too much time in summing up what occurred yesterday afternoon, but I think it's important to try to create a bit of a synthesis of where we stand at this point, going forward into the final day of submission. So, what are we trying to argue at this point? Is there a problem broadly based? Is it a provable problem with the living wage? I believe yes, we proved conclusively that this is the case. Then going forward, are there feasible, practical, legal, let alone moral reasons or avenues to change that problem? And if so, yes, let's go forward again, and that will be the tenor of the second day. So combining the presentations of two of our experts yesterday, I believe it was decisively proven, not using just simply our own data, but using data put forward by the government of Cambodia, that there has been a sharp decline, not only in real wages, overall for garment workers over the last decade, so that while the industry itself is booming, in fact, record profits for this year, real wages, the ability, purchasing power, wages against inflation have declined precipitously over the last 7 years. And not only that, one can't even argue that that's a national trend. That is specific to garment workers, so that our first presenter, our first expert presenter made it fairly clear, not fairly clear, very clear, that even within the pie of real wages declining in Cambodia, garment workers specifically, now this is important, garment workers specifically, the largest, most important export industry in the country, within the pie of declining wages, their wages have declined. It is very hard economically and frankly morally to justify that scenario where you have the most important industry in the country's wages declining within an overall decline of wages against inflationary pressure. Secondly, are there feasible ways to go about fixing that problem? There are. Our second presenter not only used an example, but also gave us quite clear data. Against the decline of wages in Cambodia, again, the garment industry being the most important industry in the country, our second expert presenter pointed at, frankly, the astonishing profit margins and profits of the big brands. I'm not talking about the industry, I'm not talking about targeting GMAC, the Garment Manufacturers Association of Cambodia here. I'm talking about the brands themselves, the big brands. The profit margins, despite global economic turndown, despite great financial pressure, the overall profit margins of the brands are huge, enormous, at a time when real wages are declining. So it's not a simple question of, I hate to use the term, the old left or redistributive wealth, or simply taking people's money in a Robin Hood fashion, giving it to the poor. But if we were saying that the brands take the garment manufacturers themselves at the national level, are we able to say the brands themselves, the big players, are they not capable of taking part in a creative fashion to redistribute wages for the average garment worker in Cambodia? Anyone who says no should possibly look at the statistics provided by my friend Ben Gert yesterday, and I think that might change their mind. He also gave practical examples. A very inspiring story from the Dominican Republic, the special economic zones of the Dominican Republic. And this is particularly impressive for those of us who work in the industry, generally advancing workers' rights in the special economic zones, those most sensitive in various countries. I think of Bangladesh, I think of Sri Lanka. Triumphs from the vantage point of workers' rights made there are even more impressive than in the industry as a whole, in my estimation. He looked to a factory called Alto Gracia, which has gone out of its way as a premise to not only be a business, and unashamedly a business to make profit, which is what businesses do, but to do so in a way where corporate social responsibility is at the forefront, where workers' rights are at the forefront, where collective bargaining is at the forefront, and they're succeeding in doing so. So in other words, it's not simply all business is bad, all profit is bad, owners shouldn't make more than workers, et cetera, but there's a win-win option here, whereby companies can be profitable, industries can be profitable, while at the same time, workers can make a living wage, can make a decent wage, can collectively bargain, can bargain for their wages, can form unions. These things are possible. It's not a black or white and/or scenario. These things are very, very possible. And I think that was quite cleverly done. Legally, is it possible? Our legal expert looked to the labor law. While nothing is explicit about crafting out a formula for a living wage, Article 104 of the labor law speaks of a wage to guarantee every worker a decent standard of living compatible with his dignity. Now, I can't really imagine being more clear in a way. Dignity does refer, and I'll try to be quick, but dignity does refer to one's ability to eat properly, one's ability to feed their family, one's ability to have proper housing. It was clearly demonstrated that this is not the case in Cambodia at the moment. Your average garment worker is incapable of gaining these things, while the brands that are investing and many of the factories that are garnering profits from their labor have no problem doing this. Quite the opposite. They're at astronomical levels. So while there is no specific legal obligation for a living wage, there is very much one of spirit, I would submit, and Article 104 speaks to that in a way, in a very clear way. Practically speaking, is it possible? Well, some will say we simply can't invade in the market. These are market forces at work. Buyers will flee, brands will flee, factories will collapse. I don't think that's the case. In January, the Prime Minister, in a recognition, frankly, of the plight of workers here, made a fairly, what seemed to be unprecedented decision, an ad hoc decision to provide $5 to every worker in the cost of living allowance, to be clear, not the real wages, but ordered all garment factories in the country starting in January for an additional $5 a month on a cost of living allowance for workers. Now, there haven't been screams or uproars as a result of that. I don't think any brands have fled the country. I don't think factories have shut down or fled the country. That proves 2 points, that this notion, this myth of factories leaving, if we possibly raise the conditions in Cambodia, is in many ways a myth. Secondly, we can intervene in market forces. We're not talking about, the French Revolution of us marching to the barricades and destroying factories and the workers taking them over. We're talking about creative ways to increase and improve real wages, real conditions for workers. So there are abilities to be creative about this. And the linkages were also made, I would say, yesterday as well, that this is not, the poor wages, the limited wages are a piece of a broader pie, that the problems that are plaguing the industry are very much linked, so that another way, obviously, to benefit workers, for workers to take control of their own destiny, to collectively bargain properly, is through real, legitimate collective bargaining. So that unions not only need to be formed, but need to be allowed to collectively bargain. And that can't, let us say it is occurring, the promise is there, but collective bargaining doesn't simply mean checking off a box, where so often yellow unions or unions that are simply not genuine independent unions are formed, registered, they form a collective bargaining agreement in their workplace so that workers can be told that they have a collective agreement, investors and brands can say this factory, look, has a collective agreement, employers are happy, unions are happy, but the collective agreement is nothing if it only speaks to minimum wages that are already encapsulated in the law. The point of collective agreements are simply that, to collectively agree to better your life, to collectively agree to better the terms of your employment. So it's important for the industry, for the government, and for brands to say that factories where they invest not only have to allow, but to promote collective agreements, collective bargaining from all unions, not some favored unions, but all unions. I would submit particularly those of the independent trade union movement here. Again, other pieces of the pie. When wages are low, a direct link was made by our second expert yesterday of how the downward spiral that occurs because workers aren't able to feed themselves. Not being able to feed themselves is not only a moral problem, but it results in what occurred as he also noted, it's somewhat amazing that it didn't occur earlier, but what occurred starting in August and then going throughout the subsequent months of workers fainting en masse, not simply because of the working conditions in the factory, but clearly because they're unable to feed themselves. Now, that's directly related to linkages, so all of these things form part of the puzzle. But in every travesty, in every possible tragedy, there is a flip side of this. This conundrum that we're in, this problem that we're in, where workers simply aren't gaining a living wage, presents for itself an opportunity for this industry to provide a model for the world. I don't believe, personally, having been here for a year and a half and having been in Bangladesh in the same job for 4 years, that an amelioration and improvement in workers' wages or conditions will cause people to flee Cambodia. Quite the opposite. Investors and brands are here in Cambodia not because of the cut rate market, not because of the enormous production value. They're here because this industry puts itself out to be a model for investment, a model for corporate social responsibility. That is why, with respect, the ILO BFC program is here and is pointed to, in many ways, quite accurately as a model of how standards can be improved. Brands like to invest here. People like to invest in Cambodia because it's a small enough industry, relatively speaking, incredibly important for the country, but in a global sense, a small enough industry so that we can try new things here. So if we're trying things like the ILO BFC, why don't we try things like GMAC, the garment manufacturers, and the union showing a cooperative spirit to work together as genuine stakeholders to improve the lot of workers? Why don't we try things like saying, fixed duration contracts, while economically viable, don't promote collective bargaining, don't promote freedom of association. Let's work together to eliminate those. Let's try things like workers aren't able to feed themselves. Is it simply a case of, well, what are inflationary pressures? If we raise wages, well, prices may go up as well. So are there more creative ways to do this? Are there creative ways to sort of say, as part of your wage, we stakeholders, not simply the garment manufacturers, but brands, perhaps the ILO BFC, perhaps unions, perhaps labor organizations like the AFL-CIO operating in Cambodia can come up with an industry-wide nutrition program whereby built in to the working conditions of a given garment manufacturer, lunches or meals, wherever the shift may be at a given stage in the day, would be provided as part of your work conditions. This should be a model for the global industry. I'll stop there, but basically by saying that when we opened up yesterday, one of the tribunal members had said that this isn't a legal forum in the proper sense, and that's right. Whatever ruling the tribunal comes down with will have no legal bearing, but I can tell you the timing couldn't be more prescient for this tribunal to be coming into play. Not only is Cambodia assuming the leadership of ASEAN, and as a result making a lot of cosmetic changes, but we hope also a lot of long-term changes to the country, to the socioeconomic model of the country, to the way the international community and the Asian community is looking at Cambodia. What better year to make tremendous, not only symbolic, but genuine strides in its most important industry. The other thing that we haven't talked about is that the trade union law, the first country, and again to distinguish, for those of you who don't live in Cambodia, to distinguish between the trade union law and the labor law. The country is on the verge now of forming its first trade union act. Many investors, many industries aren't aware of that. It was modeled to apply to the garment sector, but it will apply to every sector. It will have enormous implications for the informal sector, for the construction industry in this country, but also for the garment sector. And for those of you involved in the process, I feel very proud to have been involved in the process, that the law that was initially envisioned was, frankly, an abomination. If it had been produced as such, it would have been one of the most draconian, backward-looking trade union laws in the region. In contrast, following months and months of negotiations back and forth, and again, this is an example of what could be achieved in Cambodia because it's a relatively small community, one-on-one meetings again and again and again at the ministerial level, at the highest level of the ILO, throughout the union movement, have crafted something, have taken away almost 95%, to give credit to the government, have taken away almost 95% of what we would have seen as draconian anti-union measures, and we hope now, when it is enacted, will be one of the more progressive trade union acts in the region. Now, if that can be done, that provides an example of what can be done, that there really can be proper stakeholder development here. Progressive means by which stakeholders can work together. So the timing for the People's Tribunal to make a decision that reflects both the agony in many ways that the Cambodian workers are going through, the pressing need for a living wage in tandem with this year, 2012, where Cambodia is the head of ASEAN and enacting its first trade union act. The timing, frankly, could not be better. So, thank you. I will pass it on to our subsequent presenters, and I believe my brother Ashim Roy will take over at this point to moderate. Thank you very much.
Christopher. Hi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christopher. I do not have any question. I would like just to thank you, and I have the same view like you do. We're not real judges, actually. It is a people tribunal, or we can say people's forum. We just give recommendation. Our ruling does not have any legal binding. I agree with you. Yesterday we listened and we gave the opportunity to workers to present 4 cases yesterday, and one was talking about low wages, the second was about fainting, third it was fixturation contract, and last one was about strike. I think all the cases, all the 4 cases, the main issue is wages. Why? Because of low wages, that they are not able to buy houses, to have good accommodation, to good food, medical services, access to education, so on and so forth, and they are not able to participate into union movement. And when they want to join the union, they would terminate the contract, and because of the low wage they would hold strikes, so on and so forth. So with all these, we would like to present our perspective. We would like to present our view to the employers, that the employers all know, the government and also the brand, the buyers who invest in Cambodia, and the general public who buy, for example, Adidas or Puma products. So we would like to send them the messages, our recommendation to all stakeholders, that you have your guideline. Stop buying any company which violates the workers' rights. Now Cambodia, it is clear, because of low wages, because of inappropriate wages, workers are now suffering, and the government, the royal government, says that they will eliminate poverty by 2015. But the situation does not improve. So actually, yesterday I did not tell the workers yesterday, because many of them came yesterday. We just informed that we are not real judge. What we can do is to give recommendation. Our ruling is not legal binding. So thank you with your speeches, and I would like to thank you. It's time now. The economic downturn, global economic downturn, affects Cambodia, and expert yesterday already mentioned that we need to have 130 or 20 USD to survive in Phnom Penh. We would like to thank the Prime Minister to increase $5, but we would like to tell the Prime Minister that $5 is too little. If it is more than 100, it will be appropriate. Thank you.
Do you to comment on that, or? No. Myself, I think that I would certainly obviously, from the point of view of the people I will represent, agree on your point. But on the other side, it is true that, as far as I understand, you are proposing or suggesting that Cambodia could be a good case where some of the what should be normal from the point of view of what has been presented yesterday, sustainability of brands, could go in the right direction of having some example because of the small size and also because of that. But on the other side, as you say, the garment industry is the key industry here. And it poses in this sense both a model possibly positive case, but on the other side could pose exactly the opposite. Say that if you are able to show that something could work on the main case of a country, then that should be the model case for government. Don't you think that in the general trends in this specific area, say take the position of not only the brands, but of China, so there is a kind of play of different actors in order to switch the roles and to maintain the same model? What would be your perception on the feasibility and on the priority steps which should be taken in order not to have actors who say, but you should start first, should be first brands or first the Chinese or first the government? Because that is the usual situation we have when we have this round table of discussion where everybody say, I agree, but somebody should start first.
I take your point, and it's an issue because not only when I spoke with the big brands, I was doing so, and their investment in Cambodia, I was doing so frankly from a Western perspective, thinking of the brands that we all think of. But even though it's a relatively small market, albeit enormously important for Cambodia, there are a lot of brands, from Chinese brands that we don't know about, other countries from Asia that we certainly know about, but that the global population itself is not aware of, that perhaps aren't where we would like to see them in terms of proper corporate social responsibility policies or even interest. And it is an issue. I don't have any magic formula now, but what I am saying is that like other projects, such as the ILO BFC, and even in that context, the factories that are involved in that program, albeit the program has a number of very strong merits, the factories that are involved in that program are not all certainly not all the factories operating in Cambodia. There's a whole other issue that we haven't touched on in terms of subcontracting that goes on here, factories that are still supplying to your Adidas's of the world, to your Gaps of the world, but outside the purview of a lot of the legal requirements that the registered export factories are operating under. That's a separate issue. But to answer your question, it's a conundrum, but I think of all, if you look at the global market, if you look at your Bangladesh's, if you look at Guatemala, if you look wherever you want to look, that Cambodia, of all of them, is small enough, compact enough, and homogeneous enough in terms of where the factories themselves are located, the relatively small community of the stakeholders and interested, that a few plays by the largest investors, those who have, if you will, the most to lose in terms of not only financially the most to use, but in terms of corporate image, that they point themselves to be ones who are strongly committed to workers' rights. If they were to unify not one, but 3 or 4 to say, we will remain in Cambodia on these terms, that would push bad actors out. And there's enough of an invitation to invest in Cambodia because of all its merits, because it is, again, relatively speaking, in the global context, a good market to invest in, an easier market, I think, to operate in than perhaps Bangladesh, for example, that the conditions are right here to make a sort of historic play. And particularly this year, as I said, couldn't be more prescient with not only the ASEAN angle, but also the introduction of the Trade Union Act, which, if the industry is unaware of it, they better become aware of it quite quickly, because it's going to have enormous ramifications for their workplace. So.
Yes, certainly want to thank you for the clear and succinct summary. It was invaluable. Just a couple of points, one of which on the COLA, sorry I didn't stay with you on that. When was that done, and how much, and what guarantee is there that everyone will get it?
Yeah, it was done, you know, I guess maybe I'm not operating at the highest level that I thought I might be, because it was done. We had no idea it was coming, but it was done. It seemed like an ad hoc measure that took a lot of people by surprise, but it was an executive decision sort of by the Prime Minister himself to say, because of the conditions prevailing, inflationary pressures, plight of the workers, et cetera, that there'll be $5 as of January 2012, there'll be $5 automatically put into sort of the cost of living allowance. That's not fixed on wages, and as far as I know, it's been widely applied. Perhaps others have. It's still relatively new, but I'm using it as an example of measures to intervene in the market that would have a real effect on workers' lives, but so that things can actually be done without people saying, right, that does it for me, I'm packing up and leaving Cambodia. So
the data that we got yesterday needs to be supplemented by $5?
It's complicated. We're not talking about the real, we're not talking about the minimum wage itself. It's a tack on it's a cost of living adjustment.
Yeah. But sorry, I'm pretty naive and pretty simplistic about these things, but instead of getting whatever wage they have been getting, workers are going to get an extra $5? They
should. It's not. It's with attendance bonuses, things like that. Other benefits that are part of the overall pay package, but it shouldn't be confused by saying that now. It confuses the issue, I think, with respect to say that now, okay, the living wage, let's take it down $5 because we have this additional $5 a month. A, it's unclear legally how it will be implemented. B, it's unclear how it's going to be implemented.
Okay, yeah. A couple other things. I think I heard you say that there was a whole other area that we don't really know anything about or haven't been informed about. Should we be? Is that significant? Is the subcontracting?
Yeah, well, I mean, first things first, but it is conceivably, and no one there aren't, the numbers range from conceivably factories outside the purview of, say, the ILO BFC monitoring scheme, that's through no fault of their own, and throughout the purview of export factories that belong to GMAC. Could be several thousand companies. Those are some figures that we're talking about. But when I say companies, it's sort of like bringing me back to times in Bangladesh, where you would have a room literally with 3 or 4 workers who, if you look through the supply chain properly, would be sourcing to a Nike or a Walmart. So it is an issue, but I think first things first, that
any idea how many people are employed?
I mean, I don't, but if you do the numbers, if you're talking about a couple...
And we don't, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, but I mean, if you're saying a conservative estimate would be over 1,000 subcontracting factories and probably double that, you know, it could be significant. Yeah?
So there is an even more sweated population of workers out there, but in the overall scheme of things, not that significant in terms of struggles around wages.
Well, it's significant in the sense that if you want to be ambitious with the new Trade Union Act, for example, workers are workers are workers, and particularly so, this gets off topic a bit, but two of the things I don't want to get too off the beaten track, but two of the things that we were pressuring the government to reform the trade union law would be to bring civil servants into the purview of trade union of collective bargaining rights, because right now civil servants, and in Cambodia civil servants constitute not just government workers, but nurses, teachers, almost any workers you can imagine aren't allowed to unionize or collectively bargain, as well as the informal sector. And we thought in those negotiations they would bring civil servants into the purview of the Trade Union Act because it would be easier to monitor, but in fact what they've now done before the Council of Ministers is to say that the Trade Union Act will apply to informal workers, which is great if you're a labor activist, but I'm not sure it's been thought through by the government because it's going to have enormous implications, so that basically any informal worker you can think of will now have the legalized right to unionize and collectively bargain.
Okay, and again, sorry, you talk very well, but quickly. You're saying that neither informal sector nor this wide range of public servants are included within the Act.
No, they hadn't been, they're not now, but under the new Trade Union Act, informal sector workers will be civil servants, but by civil servants I don't just mean government workers, I mean nurses, teachers, anything you can think of as the public sector won't be. That's sort of the agenda for this next year, to bring them into the fold. But under the Trade Union Act, we have commitments from the Minister of Labor that the draft now in front of the Council of Ministers includes informal sector workers, which could be revolutionary.
Yeah.
I shouldn't use that word, which could be good for workers' rights.
Yeah. And I mean, I like your understanding of the contradictions and the dynamics here, and obviously you're very experienced in these things, and you may not want to answer this question, I don't know, but it's a two-part question. Does the fact that most of the factories, as I understand it, that we're talking about, are owned by, shall we say, absentee owners, and what does that tell us about the sincerity, if you will, of GMAC, who apparently isn't showing up today?
Yeah. I can't speak for them. All I can say is that I can only speak from my vantage point. So one of the better and easier aspects of my job, for example, if you're in a country like Bangladesh, you really do have to almost take the hammer down with trade petition threats and market threats to get access to the people who run the garment manufacturing, let alone to make change. Here, the climate is such that we meet, not only myself, but many trade union leaders meet regularly with the head of GMAC, and a lot of what doesn't make the press, and frankly a lot of things that went on here necessarily, are resolved on an ad hoc basis. And I think there are, certainly more than any other context that I've been involved in, there is room to work with them. So as far as they're concerned, I on a personal level have no complaints, and I think they could be convinced to see that their interests, hopefully they could be convinced to see that their interests aren't too different from many of the unions here and many of the workers, in terms of, because they're feeling the squeeze as well in a very real sense. There are a lot of factories making out very, very well here and globally, but that is also the margin, the factory owner margin, where when they say we're getting killed, it's not always an exaggeration, it's very often the case. So the margin, the profit margin is, with respect to guests here, the profit margin is very much with the brands.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.